Dear students, today in this lecture I shall be discussing a topic from the paper Environmental Economics. Title of this topic that I have chosen for this lecture is Environmental Kuznet Curve, in short EKC. So before I move on to the topic, let me first highlight the learning objectives of this topic. By the end of this lecture, the learners are supposed to, number one, understand the concept of environmental Kuznet curve. Number two, to know the connection between Kuznet curve and Ekshi. And objective number three, to familiarize with the diagrammatic representation of Ekshi. Number four, to understand the factors explaining the shape of Ekshi. And lastly, to know the drawbacks of a typical Ekshi. So now let me come to the origin or the background of Ekshi. It is to the common knowledge that economic activities affect the environment in different ways. Interactions between these two is studied to better understand how to maintain a balance between the economy and environment. Such interaction between the two is a subject matter of environmental economics. So environmental economics can be defined as a discipline concerned primarily with the impact of the economy on the environment, the significance of the environment on the economy, and also the appropriate ways of regulating the economic activities to maintain a balance in between the two. Of the various types of relationships studied under environmental economics, the one between economic growth or development and the environmental quality is very important, yet controversial. That is what is going to be discussed today in this lecture. In the early 1970s, the Club of Rome put forward a view that economic growth is not sustainable subject to the existing stock of natural resources. In its first report, titled as Limits to Growth, published in the year 1972 by Meadows and others. Hence, growth should be allowed for environmental protection. But in the late 1970s, some economists, namely Dasgupta and Hill, found complementary relationship between the two, meaning that as economic growth or economic development increases, environmental quality would ultimately be taken care of by itself. So there exist two different sets of opinions about the relationship between these two. The inverted U-shape of Ekshi was first empirically tested and demonstrated by Grossman and Kruger in the year 1991 and followed by a number of other studies. However, the term environmental Kuznet curve was coined by Panayotov in the year 1993. But the debate on the nature of relationship between economic growth or development and environmental quality continues till that, because the inverted U-shape relationship is not fully confirmed in all countries. So now let us look at the definition of Ekshi. Environmental Kuznet curve, in short Ekshi, may be defined as a curve that describes the hypothetical relationship between environmental degradation and economic growth or economic development. This states that during the initial phase of economic development, degradation of environment in quality and quantity could take place, and this will increase. But subsequently, it decreases as economic development improves. Empirical evidences on such a relationship give an inverted U-shape when represented graphically. So now before coming to the diagrammatical representation of Ekshi, let us see the association that is existed between Kuznet curve and Ekshi. In the year 1955, Simon Kuznet set up a model to study a relationship between per capita income and income inequality, wherein the diagrammatical relationship is found to be inverted U-shape. Later on, this came to be known as Kuznet curve. This curve states that as the per capita income increases, income inequality also increases initially, and then it begins to decline after reaching a certain point. Putting differently, the growth of income has unequal distribution in the initial stage, and then it gains greater equality with the growth of economy in the later stage. In the similar ways, environmental degradation also increases in the initial stage of economic growth and development, and this, after reaching a certain level, begins to decline, thereby giving an inverted U-shape. That is why the name Kuznet is incorporated in Ekshi. Now, let us have a look at the diagrammatical representation of a typical Ekshi. In the above diagram, environmental degradation is shown on the vertical axis and income or GDP per capita on the horizontal axis. Generally, the empirical analysis of Ekshi, different pollutants are used as proxy for environmental degradation and per capita income or per capita GDP for economic growth or development. In the beginning, Ekshi increases at an increasing rate and then at a decreasing rate until it reaches a certain maximum level. This nature of relationship indicates that in the early stage of economic growth, there is usually the excessive use of natural resources, especially the fossil fuels, and as a result, environmental degradation also increases. The increase in environmental degradation shall continue to increase with economic growth, but at a slower rate. And in the later stage, environmental degradation reduces with further increase in economic development, as countries are by now in a position to adopt for better, more cleaner, and more environment-friendly technology in various economic activities. Having explained about the diagrammatical representation of Ekshi, let us move on to factors affecting the shape of Ekshi. Different authors propose different factors affecting the shape of Ekshi. Among them, the ones proposed by Grossman and Kruger are very important. They explain the relationship between environmental degradation and economic growth in terms of three effects. Let me now explain those three effects one by one. First, scale effect. It means that the effect of increase in production activities. Higher the volume of production requires higher exploitation or greater exploitation of natural resources, and hence more pollution is caused to the environment. This is shown by the rising part of Ekshi in the diagram itself. And second effect is structural change effect. This effect refers to the effect on the environment due to the changes in the sectoral composition of an economy, which means the changes that is taking place between agriculture, industry, and service sectors. Environmental degradation increases as an economy moves from agriculture to industrial activities, and further, the transition of an economy towards service-based or knowledge-based helps in improving environmental quality. Now, let me tell you what the third effect is. It is technical effect. It refers to the effect on the environment due to the improvement in production techniques, which are environment friendly. As economic growth increases, this effect enables countries to replace their old and pollution-causing techniques by better and more environment-friendly techniques, and thus it helps in improving the environmental quality. Apart from these three just explained effects, there are some other factors which also affect the shape of Ekshi. Let me explain some of these factors one by one again. First, institutional changes. The environmental degradation could also be due to a policy distortion regarding energy consumption and market failures. It may be due to ill-defined property rights of natural resources, and it may also be due to lack of mechanisms for internalizing the externalities. This is very much reflected in the steep rising portion of the Ekshi in the initial stage, as you have witnessed in the graph. The subsequent slower increase in environmental degradation is associated with the withdrawal of subsidies and other distortions that was provided earlier. And it may be also due to establishment of property rights for natural resources and initiation of policies to internalize the environmental externalities. And that now, the declining part of Ekc, it could be ascribed to the introduction of stricter environmental policies, increase in the level of public awareness, or it may be due to increasing in the level of education or the protection of intellectual property rights, and so on. As economies develop, societies tend to improve their social, their legal, and their fiscal infrastructures necessary for environmental improvement. Now, the second important factor is income elasticity demand of environmental quality. Let us first try to know what exactly it is. It is defined as a proportional change in the demand for environmental quality for proportional change in income level. This particular factor states that as economies attain a certain high level of development, their demand for better environmental quality increases. It's very much natural. And income elasticity demand for environmental quality is considered to be greater than 1, meaning that people's willingness to pay for a better environmental quality increases by a greater proportion than the increase in income. Third factor is international trade. International trade also plays a very important role here. It has both the negative as well as positive effects. Increase in the volume of trade tends to consume more energy. This increases environmental pollution level and also causes a decrease in environmental quality. But increase in trade of service sector will never affect environmental quality. Thus, international trade would influence the shape of Ekc through its scale effect and structural change effects. After we have discussed the various factors affecting the shape of Ekc, let us now come back to the drawbacks of Ekc. The first drawback is that the very notion that economic growth itself will eventually correct environmental degradation does not hold true for all the countries. There are cases where the Ekc is found to be unsafe in spite of having an inverted U-shape. This is found by some economists in taking studies for some different countries. The second drawback is the majority of studies on Ekc is econometrically weak. So, better econometric models need to be adopted in order to enable better prediction of the relationship between environmental quality and economic growth. Drawback number 3, the Ekc does not recognize the environmental issues like animal extinction, because most of the studies so far on Ekc centers around or it focused on different types of pollutants. So, a wider range of environmental issues need to be incorporated while studying the Ekc. Drawback number 4, Ekc hypothesis does not acknowledge at all that economic growth is limited by the resilience of the environment. Now, let me come to the conclusion of this topic. As have explained before, that a typical Ekc predicts that a country in its early stage of economic growth will experience a higher level of environmental pollution and degradation, because individual countries are more concerned with their income and employment rather than with the environmental quality until a specific level of income is reached. But this relationship is not confirmed in all the countries alike. Nevertheless, environmental degradation and lowering of its quality have now become a global problems, attracting considerable attention. So, a more structured model capable of incorporating a wider range of environmental problems would be the need of the hour. So with this, let us end the lecture here. Thank you.